All right, is everybody ready to get started? Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for coming. I'm excited to be here. I hope you're excited to be here. I just want to say thank you to the IFF for having me. It's an absolute privilege to be here speaking to you guys on something that I'm extremely passionate about, making exercise matter, fitness in firefighters. My name is Dave. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Toronto in Canada. For the past 12 years or so, this is what I've been trying to do. So I've been trying to research, apply the research to figure out how do we make exercise matter. For the past 7 years, I've been working specifically with a firefighting population. For the past 3-4 years, I've been working with the IFF on the development and, I guess, evolution of their PFT curriculum. So a lot of what we're going to go over today is going to be integrated into the PFT curriculum as we move forwards. I'm extremely excited about it, and hopefully you guys get a little excited about it as well. Okay? On that note, first thing I want you guys to do is think about why you exercise. Okay? I think everybody would probably agree that exercise is important, especially for firefighters, but why do you exercise? Maybe somebody told you it was a good thing to do. Yes? Any other reasons? Maybe longevity, preventing injuries, preventing cardiac disease, lots and lots of benefits. Okay? But too often, we don't really think about how to make exercise matter. It's just, we know that exercise is good for us, or we've been told exercise is good for us, and so we go to the gym or go for a run without really having a purpose. And so I really want to share with you guys today what I've learned over the past 12 years. How do we prevent injuries? How do we really make it matter? So rather than just going out and making ourselves tired, can we exercise with a purpose? And from what I've found, we can. Okay, so I want to share some of that with you guys today. It's not just about preventing injuries on the fire ground. It's not just about preparing you for your job duties. Everyone here has a very physically demanding job, but we can make exercise matter beyond that. Okay? When you exercise, it shouldn't just be for one single purpose, because it can have a really broad reach. It can impact everything you do at home. You know, if you want to play with your kids, you don't want to get hurt on the job, so you can continue playing with your kids. If you like going for a run after work, you want to be able to continue doing that long into retirement. Okay, so when you're really thinking about why you exercise, think about the things that you love to do outside of work and how you would feel if you couldn't do those things because maybe you hurt yourself while you were exercising. That would really, really suck, right? You know, imagine going to the doctor because you got a sore back and the doctor says, you know what? No more lifting, no more golf. How would that make you feel? It would really, really suck. Too often, firefighters are getting hurt while exercising. That's the one environment we can control. Okay? We don't want anybody telling us that we can't do the things that we love to do anymore. And so we got to really think about how to make exercise matter. And so I'm going to share with you guys today some insight into how injuries happen. So if we have a better understanding of how injuries happen in the first place, and specifically back, because back injuries are one of the biggest causes or types of injuries being sustained by firefighters. So how do we actually prevent those from happening in the first place? So over the past couple of years, there's been some evidence coming out to highlight that a lot of the injuries being sustained by firefighters are happening during exercise-related activities. There was a study in 2012 by Poplin and their colleagues. They found that 33% of all the injuries reported by a mid-sized department were related to exercise. So that kind of set off some red flags. A lot of people are thinking, okay, well maybe we should cut back on exercise. Exercise is bad. It's causing a lot of our problems. Maybe if we stop exercising, that's going to save us a lot of dollars. It's going to prevent a lot of these injuries from happening in the first place. I think that's completely irresponsible. If we start cutting exercise and not allowing our firefighters to engage in those type of activities, I think we're going to set ourselves back. There was another study that came out just recently saying, yeah, Firefighters do get hurt while exercising, but exercising also prevents injuries that are sustained outside of exercise. So it's this catch-22. Exercise is related to injury, but it's also preventing other injuries. I've been working with the department in Canada trying to better understand the scope of their injuries so we can intervene, try and prevent some of this stuff from happening. And the graphs you see on the left here is the distribution of injuries in their department over a 5-year span, categorized by job duty. So the leftmost is actually injuries that were sustained at the station. Top graph is all sprains and strains. So over the 5-year span, I think they had 845 sprains and strains, the majority of which were sustained at the station, performing station-related activities. Next highest was exercise-related stuff. So 27% of their injuries were sustained while training. But if we just stop there, it doesn't tell the whole story. Because if we just say exercise is bad and don't understand the types of injuries, maybe the activities that were being performed when the injury was sustained, we don't have a sense of the big picture. What's the root of the problem? If we look at the second graph there, it's back injuries. So back injuries were about 33% of all injuries. But you can see it wasn't just in one job duty. Back injuries are being sustained across the board. If we break it down further into motion patterns, so lifting-related injuries were about half of all back injuries. But again, you can see it wasn't just during exercise. So maybe if we can go in and exercise a little smarter and prevent some of the exercise-related injuries, maybe that's going to transfer to our other job duties. If we can really understand the types of injuries that are being sustained while exercising. Okay, if we really make exercise matter. Because I hope one of the take-home things you get from me today is it's how you exercise. So the goal of exercise should be to make people better, not to make people tired. Okay, think about that. When you exercise, is the purpose just to beat yourself up and make yourself tired? Or do you want to make yourself better? I opt for better. We can't beat ourselves up every single time or every single day in the gym, or if we're going for a run. It's not sustainable. For firefighters, we want to live healthy, active, long into retirement. So it's important to understand why we're exercising in the first place and how do we make it matter? How do we structure things so we can, sustain it long term? So we're going to discuss a little bit about that today too. Okay, so I like videos. So I think this is incredibly impressive, but incredibly stupid. So I'm sure everybody here would probably look at that and agree that it's probably pretty impressive. But you wouldn't recommend doing something like this if you want to make yourself better. I actually had a colleague of mine come into the lab, and he was brave enough to try something like this. So when we asked him, will you lift initially 225 pounds off the ground, or try to anyways, with your elbows? He's like, I don't know, but tried it, and he's like, that was pretty easy. Let's bump it up a little bit. 315 pounds, lifted off the ground like that. And when he was doing it, we had him hooked up, so we were looking at the way his muscles were working, looking at how much range of motion he had in his back. We had the guy, before we started, bend down, touch his toes, see how much range he has in his back, so passively. It's about 40 degrees of flexion in his back. When he did this, it went up to 80. So he went twice as far as he could passively with 315 pounds. So not a great way to make yourself better. Fantastic way to hurt yourself. So everybody here is probably saying, okay, I get that. I would never do this in the gym. But what about something like this? So we've all heard, lift with your legs, not with your back. But what does that mean? We hear it a lot, And we kind of think we know what it means, but really, what does it mean? So I've asked a lot of people this. Oftentimes, we'll look at the person on the right and say, that's a terrible lifting posture because the trunk's way over. But the reality is, you should be focusing on what the back is doing, not necessarily the trunk. So when people hear lift with your back and not with your, lift with your legs and not with your back, oftentimes what you see is this. And so their back actually rounds and they're shooting their knees forwards. So while trying to protect their back, maybe like the guy on the left, they've rounded their back, but they've also put their knees at risk too. So we're going to go over some of this stuff in the workshop, but what I want you to think about is what we often think is good from a science standpoint is not, because we don't really understand how injuries actually happen. So I'm going to share with you guys in a little bit how back injuries actually happen so that you can take that information home and say, when I watch somebody, I know they're going to be at a higher risk because of this. I know that when somebody says lift with your legs and not with your back, it means this. It doesn't mean don't bend over that way if my back is nice and straight. This is bad. That's very different. So what the back sees is completely different in those two situations. Does everybody see the difference? Yeah? Okay. What about this? So we don't often think about back injuries occurring during cardio exercise. But what about this type of activity? If we're not paying attention to what the back sees, what's the load on the back in something like this? What habits is this creating? Okay, think about that. It's not just in the gym. It's any activity you do. Think about why we're doing it. What are the implications? From a back perspective, what is the back seeing? Here's another one. Stretching our hamstrings, right? Maybe not. What are we stretching? Maybe you're stretching your hamstrings. What else? Maybe you're stretching your back. But I ask you, why are we stretching our back? What limits range of motion in your back? Your spine doesn't function the same way as your knee or as your hip. It's not muscles that are really limiting your range of motion. It's passive tissues, it's bones, it's discs, it's ligaments. So in this situation, what are we stretching? And why are we stretching it? What are the implications for something like this? What habits are we creating? Again, think about what the back sees. Once we start to understand what tissues are getting injured when we sustain a back injury and how those tissues are loaded, we'll have a better understanding of how to prevent this stuff from happening in the first place. Another one. When the goal becomes to get your leg as far as you can and you forget about how you're doing it, there are implications. What's going on with his back? So again, he gets his leg to a certain height, then what? His pelvis starts to go. His back starts to round. What habits are we creating? So I want you guys to really reflect on how you exercise, how your peers exercise. Have you ever thought about this type of stuff? How are you moving while you exercise? And what are the implications in everything you do? What about this? When I show you guys how injuries actually happen to the back, I'll ask you again what you think of something like this. Again, the spine doesn't function the same way as the hips. It doesn't function the same way as the knees. So we don't train it. We can't train it the same way. If we do, we risk getting hurt. And I just want to put something out there. I've been here. I've done all these things. I thought they were amazing. And it's only when I started to dig into the research a little bit that I started to say, okay, maybe there is a better way. And there is a better way. And so we're going to go through some of these exercises later on. And kind of as I've mentioned, it's what habits are we creating by exercising in this way? So it's not just the gym, but what are the implications for tasks that we perform outside the gym, whether it's on the fire ground, whether it's at home? There are implications. Injuries don't just happen in a single event. Sometimes it takes a lot of, whether it's days, weeks, months, even years to accumulate. So tissues become degraded over time. So eventually they break, but that was just the culminating event. Okay, so if we exercise with disregard for how we're moving in the gym, it could transfer to something like this, so that eventually we get hurt just picking up, our keys off the floor. But it wasn't that actual event that caused the injury. So how do injuries happen? It's really pretty simple. I want you guys to think. It's going to be demands versus capacity. So a tissue has a capacity or a strength. Say I take this little thing here. What does it cause to break it? If I want to break it in half, I have to apply a certain force. Correct? Our tissues work the same way. If I want to break a bone, I'm going to apply a sufficient force, it's going to break. So from an acute sense, so from an instant in time, if I want to cause an injury, I need to apply a load or a demand that exceeds that tissue's capacity. In the figure here, what you see, the dotted line, is the applied load. You can't really see it, but there's a line at the top here. This is the tolerance or the capacity of a tissue. I'm going to apply a load. There's this margin of safety here. Tissue doesn't get hurt. I fall off a ladder. All of a sudden, the applied load exceeds my tissue's capacity. It breaks. That's how injuries happen. Okay? From a back perspective, it's not muscles. It's not typically our muscles that are getting damaged. It's discs, it's ligaments, it's bones. From an acute sense, end plates. So right here, this is a spine. So looking, if we see this, think about the spinal column. We have vertebrae, disc, vertebrae, disc. This is looking at the vertebrae from the top. This is a fracture to the vertebrae. Okay? An acute injury to the back, if you hear a pop, oftentimes it's an end plate fracture, which is that. Sometimes it's a ligament. Everybody heard ACL injuries? This is a great way to tear your ACL and your MCL. So there are no muscles that oppose that motion. So if we want a muscle to pull our leg back to here, there are no muscles to do it. So what does it? It's a ligament. So the ligament gets damaged if the applied load exceeds the ligament's capacity. Okay, from an acute injuries, remember, demands capacity. Demands exceed capacity, bad things happen. All right, I have one of my partners up here. Okay, this is a little hard to see too, but I want to convince you guys that spine curvature matters. So remember before when I was talking about lifting, and we're bending over. Your spine angle is really, really important, and I'm going to tell you why. You're good for a sec. So in the top picture, what we have here, we have somebody bending over, and they have a neutral spine or a nice flat back. This is the picture of the ultrasound. So at the top, this is the spine. Right here, you can kind of see the red arrow. That's the orientation of their muscle fibers in their back. Okay, so if I have Luke here, Luke's going to bend over as he's lifting a nice flat back. What's gravity doing to his upper body? It's pulling him forwards, right? So it's trying to pull his upper body forwards on his pelvis. What prevents that from happening? His muscles, okay? So his muscles act at a 45-degree angle, or about a 45-degree angle, so they're pulling back this way. So gravity's pulling him down, his back muscles are pulling this way. So ligaments don't have to do a whole lot of work. Luke's really good. All right, but what happens if Luke flexes his spine? Okay? On the bottom here, this is that situation. So same person, bending over, now they're flexing their spine. Gravity's still pulling his upper body forwards. But what happens to the orientation of those muscle fibers? It changes. Now it's almost parallel to the spine. So what happens to that opposing force here? It's gone. So the muscles can't oppose gravity anymore. You can come back. What does it? Ligaments, discs. Okay, that's not necessarily a good thing. We want the muscles to do the work. So there are reasons why flexion is bad. This is one of them. Okay, if the muscles can't contribute to offset gravity in that situation, it's going to be those more vulnerable tissues that get damaged, that don't repair as well as muscles do. Does that make sense? So, lab that I've come from, what we do, this is a spine, by the way. So what we do is we compare the loads that it takes to break tissues to the loads that firefighters experience when performing exercise-related activities, job-related activities. So we can say, how much risk do you actually have when you move in this manner? How much risk is associated with this job? So this is a situation where we're taking two vertebrae and a disc, and we're seeing how much load does it cause to break it. We also look at how much load does it take to herniate a disc. How do we herniate a disc? What's the best way? Okay, so we blend a tissue level analysis to the human analysis, and we blend those to figure out what's risky, what's not. Injuries, like I said before, injuries aren't just an acute problem. We take a wire coat hanger and we bend it. Does it break the first time? No. Second time? Maybe not. Third time? Maybe not. Eventually, it's going to break. So we're applying the same load time and time and time again. So apply a load, give a break. Apply a load, give a break. Eventually, what happens, it's hard to see on here, that tolerance or the capacity of the tissue degrades. So it starts to go down. Eventually, a seemingly simple little task, not much load, causes injury. Most of the injuries being sustained by firefighters occur that way. So it's not the result of one event, it's an accumulation of damage over time. So we have to really be aware of how that damage is accumulating. What we see at the top here, this is a disc. So this is a disc from your back. You see the nice gooey middle bit here? When you herniate your disc, that stuff protrudes either to the back, to the side, or to the front. What you see here is a disc that has been herniated. So the middle gooey bit has been dyed just to make it easier to see. And so what we've done is we repeated flexion. So flexion is one of the greatest ways to herniate your discs. So if we constantly do that, great way to herniate your disc. In this situation, what we've seen is it's posterior, so posterior is this way, but it's also lateral. So looking at the actual mechanism of injury here, or I guess how the disc, or how the nucleus of the disc has migrated through the annulus to the back, we can tell what types of motions, what types of loads have caused that injury. If we see a disc that's been damaged and it's gone to the side, that's flexion with rotation. If it was just flexion in this plane, you're going to see it go straight back. So if somebody does present with a posterior lateral herniation, we have to say, okay, what tasks are you performing in your life that include flexion and rotation? Think back to this stuff. Some of that stuff, that's the exact motion. You guys may have heard, sit-ups are bad. There is some truth to that. Because what we found, the best way to herniate a disc is repeated flexion. It's even easier to do it when we add load. And by load, I don't mean adding weight to your hands. When our muscles contract, that adds load to the spine. So when we're doing sit-ups, our muscles are contracting. If we're flexed and our muscles are contracting, it's even more load on the back. We do that time and time and time again. It's a recipe for herniation. If we're doing stuff where we're twisting to the side, even better. What you see here, this is a spinal cord. The bright discs here, that's a nice healthy disc. When something herniates, you see it kind of impinge on the spinal cord. Okay, one other little thing I want to note here. So I said when a disc is herniated, the big gooey bit in the middle, the nucleus, kind of migrates its way back into the side or just straight back. It doesn't just squirt out directly. Okay, so herniations don't necessarily occur acutely because it takes time for the nucleus to weave in and out of this outside layer of the disc. And so what I'm showing here, we had a spine surgeon come up to the lab, did a really, really cool study. So he took a disc, and what he did is surgically remove every single little layer of the annulus to look at how does the disc or the nucleus actually migrate back to the outside. And so if you look at this location of the disc right here, you kind of see a little purple dot. The disc or the nucleus has been dyed again. As he starts removing layers, which are kind of crisscrossed, what you see is the nucleus is kind of like a worm moving its way through to the back of the disc. And so eventually, you see the thing kind of poking out. What I want you to take home from this is that the nucleus works its way through. So if you think about repeated flexion, repeated twisting, that kind of opens up these layers to make it easier for the nucleus to migrate its way through the back. So if we don't allow those things to happen, it's going to be a lot harder for the nucleus to make its way through. So if we apply all this stuff to exercise, start thinking about what motions are we using during exercise? What injuries are actually happening? And could the way we're exercising be allowing this to happen? So like I said, if we want to herniate a disc, flexion's great at doing it. We add load, makes it even better. Even worse with twisting. Okay, so I showed you the exercise at the top before. At the bottom, I kind of alluded to this, but what are we stretching? In this type of situation, what are we stretching? What is stopping us from going any further when we're rotating, trying to stretch our back out? Typically, it's bones. Our vertebrae hit. It's not muscles that are limiting us here. And so I ask you, why are we stretching our back? Just think about that. Okay, so I mentioned that we take the tissue part and we blend it with what firefighters do. We look at the way their muscles are working. We look at the way they move. We calculate the loads on the back, and we produce something like this. So this is basically an animation of firefighters' skeletons as they perform a bunch of tasks. And so with this information, we can actually calculate what's the load on the knee, what's the load on the back, and how does that relate to the loads that cause injury. And so we can say that this individual moves in a way that loads his or her tissues in a way that is very risky, whereas this individual does not. And we can look at exercise interventions and say, does this actually reduce the load? Does this reduce your risk for injury? Does it create a good habit? And so over the past 6 years, that's what we've been doing. So we've been looking at what tasks impose greater risk. How do we intervene to reduce somebody's risk? About 4 years ago now, we did a big training study with the Pensacola Fire Department. It was a 12-week study. Took the whole department, and we split them up into 3 different groups. Everybody, 2 groups got an intervention. and we had one control group. The first intervention group participated in what we call like a fitness type program. So the whole purpose of the program was to make them as fit as possible. Strength, cardiorespiratory efficiency, endurance, power, all that stuff. But we didn't really pay attention to how they were exercising. The coach, so we had certified coaches working with both groups. The intent was to motivate, encourage, really jack up their fitness. Then we had a second group. We called it a movement-oriented fitness group. So the focus, still improve your endurance, your power, your strength, all these things, but the coach paid attention to how they were moving. He gave feedback. If you were moving in a certain way, to say, we need to keep your back straight. That was done. Okay? And then we had a control group. What do we find? So, as we know, one of the reasons we exercise is to improve our fitness. And so we found that, so right here, these are all the tests that we did. So we body comp, treadmill test. So we did the Gherkin protocol, front plank, side plank, grip strength, push-ups, vertical jump, upper lower body power. Leftmost group is the fitness group. So the group that didn't really pay attention to how they were exercising, but just tried to encourage, motivate, improve their fitness. Middle one was that movement-oriented fitness. So we just paid attention to how they were doing it. What you can see, both groups improved their fitness. So what I'm showing here is you don't have to sacrifice your fitness or your performance by paying attention to how you move. Oftentimes when we hear, movement matters, all that stuff, it's perceived as this fluffy, low-level stuff. We're going to lie you on the ground and teach you how to activate your glutes. That's not the purpose. It's to teach you how to move in a manner that's safe and effective, but to improve your performance, to make you more efficient, make you more effective. And the great thing was our control group acted like a control. They didn't change. So fitness went up. What happened to the way they moved? What happened to the way they moved in tasks that weren't performed while exercising? There was a big difference. Okay? So exercise can change the way we move. But how we exercise matters. So what I'm showing here is we have the blue bars are the so-called movement group. The red bars are the fitness group. Yellow is control. I've got a lifting task and a squatting task. Going up means that the firefighters exhibited less spine motion post-training. Okay, so if they were this way post-training or before training, more neutral post-training. The red bars going down means they had more spine flexion post-training. So what the take-home from this is when we emphasized fitness only, the firefighters actually got worse from a movement standpoint post-training. I'm only showing you lifting and squatting here. We did a bunch of firefighting-related tasks, so chopping, forced entry, ceiling breach and pull, lifting, squatting, pushing, all that stuff. The trends were the same. So how you exercise actually mattered. It influenced how they moved when performing tasks that weren't performed during exercise. To me, that's really, really telling. So we have to ask ourselves, why are we exercising in the first place? If we can improve fitness with either program, but paying attention to how we move actually can make a difference in how we move, potentially reducing our risk, would we not want to do that? And then what would the implications be for everything we do outside the gym? These tasks weren't performed in the gym. This was a transfer task. These were transfer tasks, things they weren't coached on. So what this tells me is maybe we changed their habitual behaviors. So what I'm saying, movement is a behavior. It's not an ability. Okay? And it's influenced by exercise, either for the good or for the bad. Depends on how much we pay attention to it. This kind of summarizes what I'm saying. So if we're lunging, we don't want the knee necessarily tracking like this. Okay? So does everybody see that? So if it's not aligned, again, my muscles aren't going to be able to help me out here. It's going to be my ligaments. It's a great way to tear your MCL or your ACL. We don't want spine flexion. We don't want rotation. So if we focus on, in exercise, to stabilize these desired features, the hope is that this stuff creates a habit so that when we perform tasks outside the gym, they emerge. These same key features emerge. So if we focus on keeping the knee aligned, if we focus on keeping the back straight, the idea is that that stuff will transfer to other things that we do. Because if we don't, and we use exercise and don't pay attention, and we stabilize undesired features, what's the implication? Those undesired features could emerge and persist in everything else that we do. So when we look at injuries and the distribution of injuries for firefighters, and we say, 27, 30% are being sustained in exercise, how many of the other injuries that are sustained are because of the way we're exercising? Or vice versa. Maybe it's because we're performing a certain way on the fire ground that we exercise a certain way. When if we just pay attention to how we're doing things, maybe we could actually make a difference everywhere. So I really think because the exercise environment is so controlled, if we can focus on how we do things there, make our peers more aware, that we can establish new habits. The evidence I showed you from the training study says that is possible. And so if we can change people's movement behaviors using exercise, then maybe those same things are going to emerge in other job-related duties, in things you're doing at home. So not only are we going to reduce the injuries that are sustained in exercise, but we're going to have a dramatic impact on all the other injuries that are being sustained as well. Okay? That's how we can make exercise matter. I'm so excited because that's the direction the IFF has taken. They realize that how you exercise matters. And so they want to spread that education and teach you guys how to actually do it. Oh, this is something I like to reiterate time and time again. Practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Okay, take that home too. So if you practice an undesirable behavior, it's going to become permanent. If you practice desirable behaviors, they will become permanent. Okay? So think about how you exercise. So, all that said, if we're applying this to exercise, we need a framework. We often, on the internet, from books we read, we hear about new exercises, new ways to structure programs. It's all wonderful, but we need a framework to apply it to. Over the 16 years that I've been studying this stuff, this is what I think it boils down to. It's a balance between demands and capacity. So our demands are the things that we need to do and the things that we want to do. And our capacity is our ability, our motivation, our awareness to do those things safely and effectively. If we can use exercise to enhance our capacity or maintain our capacity to meet our demands, we're going to prevent injuries. It's as simple as that. So, what does this all mean? So, demands, what it really comes down to is the FIT principle. Everybody here familiar with the FIT principle? Frequency, intensity, time, type. So it's how often do you do something? How heavy is the task? Are there high speeds associated with it? Do you perform it for extended periods of time? So that's how we describe our demands. But I'm going to add a movement piece to it. So I said, we want to keep our back straight. We want to keep our knee aligned. And so if we can understand what key features or what type of tissues are being loaded during these activities, it'll be even easier to understand our demands. Capacity. So typically what happens is we focus on how much weight's being lifted, how fast you're going, how high are you jumping. So when we're performing a vertical jump, this is all we look at. We don't pay attention to how we're jumping. So I just showed you guys that how you move matters, that how you exercise matters. So if we have no idea what the person looks like, We could be recommending something that's actually imposing greater risk. We could be encouraging them to continue something that puts them at greater risk. So we have to pay attention to how they're jumping in addition to how high they're jumping. Does that make sense? So the way I define capacity is being fit to move without compensation. So we still have to be strong. We still have to have the endurance. We still have to have the cardio aerobic capacity. Because what happens when we fatigue? What happens if we're not strong enough? So if I'm trying to lift up something really heavy and I'm trying to maintain my form and I'm not strong enough, what happens? My back goes. So I have to be strong enough to do it. So I have to be fit to move. Okay, so movement isn't just how much range of motion do you have. It's, are you strong? Do you have the endurance? How fit are you to move well? And for firefighters, that's so important. Some general principles. So as I've been saying, capacity is fitness and movement. We can't look at one without the other. We need to let movement guide the progression of our fitness. So we can't just put movement over here and say, okay, today we're going to forget about it and we're going to run you till you can't run anymore. And at the end, you're doing all this. That's imposing risk. Okay, again, making people better, not making people tired. We need to train movements, not muscles. I don't know about you guys, but I can't see through the skin. So if something like this happens, oftentimes we hear, oh, yeah, I got a weak glute med. Maybe not. What if you just don't know? So many times I've said, do you know that your knee's doing this? I'm like, no. Can you keep it here? Okay, yeah. I gave a workshop to a department in Canada. Just a half-hour workshop. I was teaching them how to walk upstairs. I said, basically, don't let your knee fall in. Okay, that's going to put excess load on it. Keep your knee in line with your foot and your hip. Guy said, okay, that sounds pretty easy. Had a captain come up to me and said, you know what? I've had knee pain for 20 years. Every time I walk upstairs. Today I didn't have pain because he became aware of how he was moving. Saw him 2 months later. Said, you know what? I haven't had pain since that day. Guy had been living with pain for 20 years because he didn't know. So a lot of this stuff, guys, isn't really, really challenging. It's not really, really difficult. Oftentimes, people just don't know. So we can make a massive difference just by highlighting what these key features are. Emphasizing that movement does matter from a performance standpoint and an injury standpoint. And we're going to go through this, some of this in the workshop in a sec. It's not about the exercise. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with cleans and snatches in Olympic lifting, but in a lot of programs, they're considered essential, irrespective of the ability or the experience of the individual performing. And so you get situations like this. And I ask, what are we doing? If somebody isn't capable of performing that activity, there are 1,000 different things that we can do to achieve the same response. So don't become married to an exercise. All exercises are tools. Okay? Focus on how you're moving and why you're doing it in the first place. Enhancing capacity is a process. So again, like we mentioned earlier, when you exercise, it has to be sustainable. Don't try and achieve something within a week or 2 weeks. You want to be fit long into retirement. So you can't beat yourself up every day. Take recovery. Modify the intensities. So some can be high intensity, but don't make them all high intensity. You're never going to survive. Train with a purpose. Look at the things you need to do. Look at the things you want to do. Prepare yourself for that. Okay? Don't prepare for somebody else's life. Oftentimes, that's what we do, and then we end up hurting ourselves, and we don't get the satisfaction that we really want. And then we improve the transfer of training by emphasizing those desirable or key features. Keep your back straight. Keep your knee in line. Okay? If we can do that, irrespective of the exercise, irrespective of the activity, eventually we're going to ingrain good habits. That's the key. Those are the things that we want to emerge from all this stuff. The beauty of it, of this whole demands capacity thing, is we're looking at demands and capacity in the same light. So when we're talking about demands, like I mentioned, it was the fit principle, frequency, intensity, time, movement patterns. We look at capacity the same way. So are you fit to move with this much load or this much speed or for this much time? At what point do you break down? At what point do you flex your spine? At what point can you no longer control things? And we can relate that to the demands that we have in our life. And if we don't have the capacity, well, we build the capacity. We do all the same exercises we're doing. We just pay attention to those key features. And we pile on strength. We pile on endurance. Okay? So how do we describe our demands? It's really 3 questions. So what activities do I need or want to perform? What frequencies, intensities, and times are associated with these activities? And what general movement patterns are associated? When you're describing your demands, don't just think about the job. Think about all those other things you do when you go home. Because for some individuals, they might participate in various activities that are more demanding than what they do on the job. And so when you're exercising, you have to make sure you're preparing yourself for those things too. Okay? So, establishing capacity. Like I've been saying, it's muscular strength, endurance, power, without compensation. So we don't want to see flexion, we don't want to see bending, we don't want to see twisting for the back. This situation here, guy's jumping really high, right? He's tucking his feet so he can actually land on that. But how high has he actually jumped? When we're looking at jump height, it's really your center of mass. So how high is your center of mass reached? This guy, he could probably keep his feet down here, not flex his spine, and be jumping the same height. So what's the objective? The objective should be to create good habits while improving your performance. So if every time this guy flexes his hips, he flexes his spine, what's that going to do to all the other activities he does, whether at work or at home, that incorporate that same pattern? Okay, the load might not be as high when he's doing this, but what if he's squatting? What if he's lifting up something really heavy? He's flexing his hips. His body knows, okay, I got to flex my spine at the same time. That's bad. Another question, or something I like to highlight with the box jumps like this, why do we keep going up? It's actually easier to land on a box than it is on the ground. Because when we land on a box, we've taken away gravity. So this is actually a regression for people. So it becomes harder to land on the ground than it does become on the box, because you have to control landing. So again, why are we doing it in the first place? There can be a good reason, but I want you to think about what's the reason I'm doing it. And one other thing to highlight, like I mentioned before, is movement is a behavior. It's not an ability. So the way you move is influenced by your strength and your endurance and all those things, but it's also influenced by your awareness, by your perception of the task, by the instructions that were provided, by your mood. Okay? Prime example. So just published a study. I'm not sure if anybody here is familiar with the functional movement screen, but it's a popular screen that's being used by a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. Originally, it was purported to address pain and asymmetries. Now it's being used to predict injury, guide training recommendations, and a whole bunch of things. So we looked at a group of firefighters and their ability to perform this functional movement screen, which is supposed to identify deficits in mobility and stability. Okay? And we compared that to some simulated firefighting tasks. This individual on the left had one of the best functional movement screen scores I've ever seen. Okay? He moved really, really well as per the criteria of that screen. So, knees and hips were aligned and everything that they had, and back was good. Then we had him do a simulated hose advance. What did we find? This. When the individual performed the hose advance, when the demands of the task went up, his movement fell apart. Okay? I was talking to the guy afterwards, and I said, "Do you have issues with your knees?" And he said, "Yeah, I have to wear braces when I play soccer and things like that because they hurt." The functional movement screen, or that low-level task, didn't pick it up because movement isn't an ability. It's a behavior. It's influenced by the load. It's influenced by the speed. So when the speed went up, when the task got more challenging, his movement patterns fell apart. He wasn't fit to move. Okay? So can you guys see, the knee here? Like I mentioned before, there's no muscles that can support that. That's the ligaments. So just because somebody moves a certain way when the demands of the task are really, really low doesn't mean they're going to perform the same way when the demands go up. You always have to pay attention to how they're moving. And for firefighters, most of the times we're getting hurt are during higher demanding activities. Does that make sense? So how do we establish capacity? Very similar to the demands. What movement patterns do I need? I'm going to say squatting, lunging, lifting, pushing, pulling, really essential to everybody. What frequencies, intensities, times? So really, what demands do I need to be fit for? And then what exercises and activities provide me with an opportunity to check that stuff out? So we're talking about the back. So I want to kind of guide your observation, show you what it looks like to be neutral. So we're going to go through. So the key features for spine control, or for the back, it's flexion and extension. So flexion, extension, lateral bend, and twisting. Okay, so I'm going to have my colleagues here come up, and I'm going to guide your observations and show you exactly what we're looking for. And then I'm going to have you guys pair up and watch each other. Oftentimes, what we think is neutral or what we think is flat isn't necessarily flat. And so before we get into the workshop and start doing a bunch of different exercises, I need you guys to be sure of what neutral is. Okay? So can I have Bill come up here and help me out? Okay, is everybody familiar with the front plank? Probably? Okay. So you just go into a front plank for a second. All right, so this is kind of a front plank. Do we think Bill is in a neutral position? And what are you guys looking at to gauge neutral? Shoulders and what was? Ears, shoulders, hips. So we're looking kind of just straight across through here? Yes, or more specific than that? Anybody? Yeah? Okay, so really, if we're concerned about the low back here, we want a nice curve in his low back. Okay, so we don't want it to be flat. We want it to be curved like he isn't standing. All right, so something simple you can do is Bill's going to go down to his knees for a sec. Bring your knees up to just below your hips, and go up onto your hands. Okay, so in this position, I'm going to see what type of range Bill has in his spine. Okay, and that's going to help me gauge where neutral might be. Okay, we're friends. Okay, so I'm going to take Bill into extension. So we're going to see how much extension Bill has. Then I'm going to take him all the way into flexion. Okay, now I'm familiar with what Bill's range is. I'm going to take him full extension again, and we're going to back off just a little bit. Okay, that's going to be about neutral. Something else you could do is look at them when they're standing. You really want to be the same position as when you're standing. Okay, so if they got a nice little curve when they're standing, you want to maintain that when you're on your hands and your elbows and your toes. From this position, so Bill's got a nice neutral position right there. I'm going to have him slide 1 foot back at a time. Okay, and the other foot. Okay, now he's neutral. Now he's in his front plank. I'm going to have him hold that position. What I'm looking for, as Bill continues to hold this, I've got 2 lines. All right, this is what I want you guys thinking about. One through the shoulders, or the upper back. One through the hips. I don't want to see any change in the distance between those 2 lines. If I do, Bill's either flexed or extended. So if you flex for me, so if I have the 2 lines here,
those lines go farther apart. Bill's flexed. Okay, go to extension. If Bill goes into extension, those lines come closer together. Okay, just relax for a second. So it doesn't matter what task Bill does. I'm going to use those two lines to dictate whether he's flexed or extended. Something else you could do is look at the wrinkles in the shirt. Okay, so if you get Bill into neutral, no, that's not neutral. There you go. Okay, so if you get Bill into neutral, look at the wrinkles in the shirt. If they start to disappear, he's flexed. Okay, if you start to see more wrinkles, he's extended. You stand up for me for a sec? Okay, so just do a little squat for me. Let's face these guys. Okay, so those guys. So I want you thinking about those two lines again. Okay, so think of his pant line and through his upper back or his shoulders. Look at the wrinkles in his shirt. As he squats down, pay attention to those wrinkles. Do the lines get farther apart? Do they get closer together? To squat down. They get further apart. So he's flexed. Okay? Sometimes what you see in people when they squat is right away they go into extension. Okay, so they initiate it, whether it's a body weight squat, a back squat, or front squat, they go into extension right away. So those two lines get closer together. You want to lock your rib cage onto your pelvis and let your trunk move with your hips. Okay? So use that. So use those two lines. Use the wrinkles in the shirt to gauge flexion and extension in anything you do. Does that make sense? All right. Okay, we're going to go. Okay, lateral bend. So how do we gauge bending this way? Two lines again. So I'm going to have Bill on the side. Put your top foot in front. Yep. Okay, so we're going to have Bill bridge up. And really, I'm looking at those same two lines again. So through his upper back, through his hips. And what I'm looking for is, are either end closer than the other? So you want to be parallel. Go up again. So what's Bill look like? Is he good? Yep. If Bill lifts up his hips, here, he's now bended. So the bottom side is closer than the top. When people fatigue, what happens? They start to sag. Okay, now they're bending the other way. You don't want to see that. You can stand up for a sec. So if I put a load on one, say Bill's doing a shoulder press on the one side, like this way, what tends to happen? We tend to bend. Okay, we don't want to see that either. So if I'm standing, same type of task, I've got a line through here, line through here. Do either side get closer than the other? Okay, so as he's pressing, does he do this? Or does he do this? We don't want to see that. Does that make sense? All right, now rotation. So right here I'm showing somebody standing. I'm going to have Bill down in a push-up position again. Can you face the wall again? Okay, so we're going to make sure Bill's nice and neutral. So Bill tends to go into flexion. A lot of people, when they go into a front plank, they go into flexion. So they tuck their butt under. Okay, it's very common. So when you guys are watching each other, make sure that you're neutral. From this position, I'm going to challenge Bill's rotation. So what I'm going to do is ask him to lift up one hand. What you guys are looking for is, does he rotate his hips independent of his shoulders? So if we have those two lines again, does one line move independent of the other? Okay, so lift up one hand. Just exaggerate. So Bill's hips are going to rotate, but his arms aren't. Okay, so now his hips are more rotated than his shoulders, and we've twisted. Bill's going to lift up the other arm. So he's not bad. Well, yeah. So some people, what you're going to see is a lot of people are going to twist when they lift up one arm or the other. And we can also challenge him to lift up a leg. You're going to lift up a leg. Well, that's a lot of rotation, and he's shifting. Okay? When he lifts up a leg, we're not only looking for rotation. What else might we be looking for? Extension. Okay? So you want to still pay attention to what he's doing. Are there more wrinkles in his shirt? oftentimes when you lift up a leg, you get the motion through your back, not through your hip. Okay, thanks, Bill. Is that all right? What I want you guys to do is pair up into groups of 3 or 4. Myself and my colleagues here are going to kind of walk around, help you guys out. But I want you trying those 3 things. So try a front plank, try a side plank, and try what I call a rotary control, where you're lifting up one arm at a time, one leg at a time, and comment on how your peers are doing. Okay, let them know whether you see flexion or extension or lateral bend. Try and really feel what it's like to control your spine. We're going to take a break in a sec, so you don't necessarily have to sit back down. But one thing I want to emphasize before we go away is that I didn't talk about is when we're talking about the back, the best way to improve our performance or reduce our risk for injury is to increase stiffness. So we want to create spine stiffness. All right, so the spine can handle lots and lots of load when it's neutral. But when we start moving it around, it's a great recipe to break it. So to get motion, we can get motion through our hips. So for rotating, we want to rotate through our hips. Our hips generate power, our spine generates stiffness. So in all this stuff we're doing, we're looking to create stiffness through our trunk, lock the trunk to the pelvis, and create power through our hips. Does that make sense? Any questions from what you guys just saw? Lots of people not in neutral when you first look at them? Yes? Maybe? No? Okay. We're going to take a small break. When we come back, I'm going to talk about how do we evaluate our peers. So what we're going to do, I'm going to have one of my colleagues here come up on stage. We're going to demonstrate 2 of the exercises. We're going to break out. I'm going to have you guys watch your peers like you did before, looking for the same stuff, so spine flexion, extension, rotation, lateral bend. And then we can probably stay where we are. We'll demonstrate the next 2, and you'll try those, and so on and so forth. Okay? So Luke's going to help me out. We're going to do a 2-leg squat and a single-legged squat. All right, so let's, we're going to have to, when you're watching somebody, what angle do you watch from? All of them. Okay, perfect. So a lot of stuff that we're looking for, we can't just see from one plane. So I'm going to watch Luke from the side. I'm going to watch him from the front. I'm going to look at it from the back. Now, when we're squatting, there's lots of stuff going on. There's lots of things we can comment on. You know, his knees and his trunk angle and his shin angle. Today, I'm just going to focus on the back, but that's not to say that there's a bunch of other stuff that isn't important. Okay? If you want to ask about that stuff, I can tell you on the side. Okay, so from a back standpoint, Luke, just do a squat for me. Okay, just come on up. Just do a couple, let everybody see you. Maybe move to the front of stage so everybody can see you. So really think about what we just talked about. Wrinkles in the shirt, line at the hips, line at the shoulders. Okay, now can you face the wall? Just do it again. I want you to think about what Luke looks like. What do we think? Does it look pretty good? Why does Luke stop there? Okay, can you go any further? Okay, so he goes further, and what happens? He flexes. So how low should we go? Go as low until you start rounding your back. There's no depth that everybody should go to. Okay, so limit your range by what type of control you have. Okay, so can you initiate with extension for me? Did everybody see that? Can you do it from the side? So I want you guys to watch, maybe just do it on an angle so everybody can see. So watch when Luke initiates, you're going to see this in some people. Right off the bat, he extends his back. See that? Okay, so what happens when we extend? Think about what the back is feeling. What tissues are being loaded? When we go into extension, it's going to be bone on bone. Okay, so when we go this way, what limits our range is typically our facets. So dancers, gymnasts, a lot of them have vertebral fractures because of lots of extension. It's a very different injury than a flexion-related injury. which is typically discs or ligaments. And so if we understand the type of injury, then we can understand the motions that are associated. Okay? Do we expect to see any lateral bend or twist with a squat? Probably not. But we might. So pay attention to the lateral bend and twist as well. Some people might have a little asymmetry, so you do pick up some of that. Is everybody comfortable with the squat in terms of what we're looking at the back? Follow the wrinkles in the shirt. It's going to be really, really telling. Okay, so if you see more wrinkles right away, they're going into extension. Ask yourself, when you're watching your peers, have them go down as low as they can, where they think they're still neutral. I guarantee most people are going to be flexed after they think they're going to think they're neutral, they're actually flexed. Okay, so getting them to feel what neutral is like. Couple cues you can use to help maintain a neutral spine. So as you're squatting down, think about pulling yourself into the ground. So rather than just letting yourself drop, I'm going to have Luke think about pinching his hips and pulling himself into the ground. So just squat down. So he's going to pull himself in. And if he's pulling himself, so if we're pulling on the front side, that's going to help keep the pelvis in a much better position. So if I'm here and I think about pinching my hips, that pulls me forwards, makes me more neutral. You guys see that? Okay, so when you're doing it, think about pulling yourself into the ground and pushing yourself through the ground on the way up. Whole time, trunk is stiff, locked onto the pelvis. One other little cue, just when you're squatting, if you keep the weight right in the middle of your foot, that's going to help keep everything nice and symmetrical. So you're not, too far back on your heels, you're not squatting on your toes. If you keep the weight right in the middle of your foot, it's going to balance everything out. And I want you to think about grabbing on with your toes. So people that are squatting and you see their toes kind of coming up. So if you see the big toe coming up, just put your finger under their toe and say, I want you to push it back into the ground. So grab on with your feet as much as you can. And that's going to help you keep nice and centered. Okay? Single-legged squat. Is everybody okay with the bilateral squat? Yeah? Okay. Okay, single-legged squat. You just, you want to hear first, Luke? All right. Does it look any different? Harder? It is harder. How's his back look? Turn first the wall again. So remember wrinkles, looking at this line, that line. This time you might see a little bend too. What's he look like? You see some flexion? So people, even though he showed he has the range to go down a little bit lower with two legs, he flexed earlier with one leg. You're going to see that too. It's a lot harder to control with one leg. It doesn't mean that he's lacking the range of motion. He might be lacking the control. Okay? We don't know how his muscles are working, but we just see he's flexing a little bit higher. Okay, so we want to stop. We don't have him squat quite as deep because he's flexing earlier. Did you see any lateral bend? Go again. A little bit? Okay. Now, what do we do with the foot? Where do we put the other foot? Like, why would we squat this way versus this way? Any ideas? What's that? Which way is easier to keep neutral? So side by side? So this way, think about if your leg is out front, what does that do to my pelvis? Pulls it with it. Okay, so if I'm trying to squat, my leg's out front, it's going to be almost impossible to control my pelvis. It's going to be way easier here. If somebody's having a lot of difficulty with it, you could stick that other leg back, which is going to make it even easier for them to control their trunk. Okay, so you can try those different things just to see how it feels. Feel the control with the different variations. Any questions for the two squats? All right, split up into your groups again. We'll walk around. again, there's lots of stuff we can look at with the knee. I want you focusing on the back again. Okay, and you can face the wall for them. So what are we looking for? Same stuff? Neutral. So we're watching those two lines again. Her hips and her shoulders. Is she flexing? Is she extending? Is she bending to the side? What might we see? Or what do we tend to see? Can you exaggerate for us and show us some compensation? Very good, very good. Okay, so when we lunge forwards, momentum takes us forwards, right? And so some people that don't have the control tend to flex on the way down when they land. And then what happens on the way up? They extend. So down this way, and then they lead with their trunk to throw themselves backwards. Oops. Can you show us that one? Sure. Just lean on the way back. Good. Okay, that's not good either. So we want to lock the trunk onto the pelvis when we push ourselves back. Jill's pretty good. What about the angle of the trunk? Anybody? Do we want it upright? Does everybody have to be upright? What are we more concerned with? The back, neutral spine. Okay, so if Jill, can you go to the bottom position for me? So if Jill really tries to keep her trunk upright, what happens if her hip is really, really tight? This hip is locked that forwards. So she's anteriorly rotated with the hip, but she's really forcing trying to keep that trunk upright. What does her back look like? Come on up. She's going to be extended. So if we say, keep your trunk upright, but my hip is really tight, here, I'm going to be extending just to try and keep my trunk up. Don't have to. Lean over. Okay, there's no reason why you have to keep your trunk upright. Just look at the back. Okay, back lunge. So Jill's going to start here, and she's going to lunge backwards. Easier or harder from a spine control perspective? What do we think? Easier, harder? Anybody? Harder. How come? Okay, so there might be a bit more of a balance challenge. What about in terms of the compensations we saw when she was lunging forwards? So she showed flexion and extension on the way back. Are we going to see those same things? Just go again for us. So is her momentum carrying her backwards and forwards? No. Because really, her weight is staying over that one leg the whole time. Okay, so when we talked about moving forwards, it was our momentum that was causing a lot of the flexion. It was our maybe lack of strength that we wanted to lead with our trunk to pull ourselves back, reduce the demand on the leg. When we're doing a back lunge, that's gone. So it really is like a single-legged squat. So Jill doesn't demonstrate the same extension or flexion when she's lunging backwards. Does that make sense? So initially, you might get a bit of a balance challenge, but it might be way easier to control motion of the trunk. So if you're progressing somebody in a lunge pattern and teaching them what control feels like through their trunk, you might want to start with the back lunge because they don't have to deal with the forwards and backwards momentum. Any questions with that? All right, in your groups again, let's try those two. I was asked about walking lunges. Where do they fit in this whole thing? What do you guys think? So if I said that the back lunge was easier because we didn't have to deal with the forwards and the backwards momentum, where does continuously walking forwards fit in? Yes. You can, yep. As you're moving forwards too, there's no backwards momentum. You're not going to get this. So walking forwards could actually be easier than doing a front lunge where you have to come back to the start. Okay? You're not going to get the extension. So again, as you're progressing people, you could think back lunge, walking lunge, then forward lunge where you're coming back. In terms of variations, then you can add loads and speeds and all that other stuff. So when we add loads and speeds, what are we going to expect to happen? It's going to be harder to control. So even though we look really, really good when the demands are low, everything could fall apart when the demands go up. Okay, whether it's reps or sets or loads or speeds, all of that stuff. So again, we're trying to establish where their capacity is. How fit are they to move well? Any questions on the lunge? No? Okay. Let's go lifting. Luke's going to help me with lifting here. All right, so Luke, I just want you to do a nice normal lift for me. All right, so what are we looking for here with Luke? What are some key elements to lifting? Straight back. What about the trunk angle? Does it matter? Not really. Okay? So whether Luke drops his butt and flexes his knees, or keeps his knees relatively straight and just flexes at his hips, it's going to change the challenge on the lower body, but both are okay, as long as his back is nice and neutral. So again, we're looking at the two lines, so the wrinkles in the shirt. So what's Luke look like? It's pretty good. Can you face the wall for us? Try it again. Come on a little bit. Good? Can you show us an exaggerated extension at the top? So this, it doesn't have to be to initiate, but okay, so that's one thing you're going to see. So right off of the bottom, did you see that? So people are going to extend. As soon as they put a load in their hand, they're going to try and get their trunk up early. And so they're not going to let their legs do the work. They're going to try and lift it with their upper body. They're going to extend their back. Or Luke could lift really, really well all the way up to the top, and then he's going to extend right at the top to exaggerate that last little bit. So rather than extending through his hips to finish, as you should, he's going to extend through his back to finish. So pay attention to how they initiate from the bottom, whether it's trunk first or whether or not they extend at the top with the hips versus the back. In terms of trunk angle, so if Luke is flexing his knees and his hips, kind of a general rule that I play with is until the load crosses his hands, until the load crosses his knees, or his hand crosses his knees, Luke's going to keep the trunk angle the same. Okay, so that trunk angle here is going to stay the absolute same until he crosses his knees. So we don't want to see this right away. So Luke's going to stay leaned over. His shoulders are going to be in line or in front of his hands until he crosses his knees, and then his hips are going to come through. Okay, so right at the start, if we look at the relationship between Luke's shoulders and his hands, shoulders are in line with his hands. Trunk angle is going to stay the same, nice neutral spine, until his hands cross his knees. How do you look? Good? Okay, so when you're watching your peers, pay attention to how soon do they lift up their trunk. What's that going to do? If I do, so if you squat the other way, so if you lean up early, what does that do? What does it do in terms of making the challenge easier or harder on his back? Are you guys familiar with like moment arms and moments? Is it easier or harder to hold the weight further away from you? So if I'm here versus here, what's easier? Closer. Okay, so if I am lifting and I put my trunk back, and I'm thinking about what the demands are on my back, is it harder here or harder here? Here. Okay, so we want to keep the load nice and close. So keeping that trunk angle the same until we cross our knees allows the load to stay nice and close to our body. Can you show us an RDL? Okay, so if Luke doesn't want to bend his knees, and all the motion's really coming through his hips, how do we, again, this is, you guys are going to answer the question because we've been saying it, but how low does he go? As low as he can while he's maintaining his back. Okay, is that okay with everybody? What happens if Luke is lifting something? So if you guys are trying this and you can't do the exercise with the weight on the ground, what do? Put it on blocks. Okay, you don't have to force somebody into something they can't do. All right, that's 2 legs. Now what about 1 leg? So what's Luke look like? Does he flex a little bit? Is he good? Stand up. How was he? Luke's pretty talented, isn't he? Okay, can you face the wall? Okay, so do it again. So this time, instead of just looking at flexion and extension, I want you looking at rotation too. So think about the line through the hips and the line through the shoulders. Are they the same? Are they parallel? So when Luke sets up right from the very beginning, are his hips level? Pretty much? Pretty close? So Luke's pretty good. There's a little bit of flexion there, but he's pretty good. Now can you exaggerate for us in rotation? See, Luke's so good he can't even exaggerate a bad pattern. Thanks, Luke. You're still not bad because your shoulders are moving well. Okay, so hard to get good help. So when you're doing this task, a lot of people are going to look like this. So their shoulders are down and their hips are really open. And then you tell them, okay, you need to drop your hip down, and they do that. And their shoulders go with it. So what you're trying to do is get the motion through your hip instead of through your trunk as well. So something you can try just as a challenge when you're doing the 1 leg is to lock your trunk onto your pelvis. Oh, hang on. And you're going to open up and close to get used to moving through your hip while your trunk is locked. Okay, so you want your shoulders moving with your hip. Once you get a feel for that, it's going to be much easier to perform the single leg deadlift. Okay? Again, grabbing onto the ground with your foot, keeping the weight right in the middle of your foot. Anything I missed? Bill? Okay, yeah, so you can, in terms of the back foot, if you keep your toe pointed towards the ground, oftentimes that helps to drop the hip down. Okay, let's try those 2. Was the single-legged one hard? Balance was hard. So what are some things people tried to make it easier? Or what can we do to make it easier? You can hold something. Okay? You can reduce your range of motion. So there's no set rule that it has to be done a specific way in terms of, nothing to hold on to. If your whole goal is to enhance the motion pattern, put yourself or your peer in a position to succeed. So if initially it's a balance challenge, get them to hold on to something. Figure out what it feels like to move your hip in and out. That's okay. Any other questions with that one? Yep. If you do find a difference in either side, that could be pretty telling. Because if they do have a difference, that might manifest itself in a whole bunch of other stuff. So when they're squatting, you might see them favoring one side. When they're lifting, you might see them favoring one side. We create habits, so we move because of habits. If somebody's ever injured their ankle or their knee, because you're typically walking on the one side, you develop a compensation. If you never address that when you're starting to rehab, that will persist. We get off the couch with the same leg every time. We get out of bed, we get out of the car, same leg. Without realizing it, we might create these habits that could impose greater risk on us. Simple example that I like to use with people is try crossing your arms. Everybody cross their arms for a sec. Then go the other way. Feel weird? Yeah. So we've created a habit. One way is easier than the other. Oftentimes we don't realize we do it. When we deadlift in the gym, a lot of people use an alternating grip, but they use the same alternating grip all the time. What does that do? You try and go the other way, it's like, oh my God, that feels really, really strange. So if you do alternate your grip in lifting, in spotting somebody, switch it. Okay? You don't necessarily want to develop a habit so that if I'm always with this hand forwards, maybe I develop a rotation or something in my back, or my shoulder's always forwards. Okay? It's these little things that we don't realize we do. But movement is a behavior. It's habits. Not necessarily, but I'm saying that you're often on one leg. Every time you walk, you're on one leg. Every time you run, you're on one leg. And so we want to teach people to control themselves on one leg. Not necessarily, because if we're running, lots of load. So we want to be able to control the knee, with lots of load. We want to be able to distribute our weight evenly, front to back. So I think it's a great question, because we have to look at the reason why we would recommend a certain exercise. If we can't relate the motion pattern to something that is relevant to us, why are we doing it in the first place? Had a great question about cleans and snatches and things like that. Why do we do them? Well, typically, it's power, extension through the hips, things like that. They're so technical. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with them, but the things you see in the Olympics, we know when everybody's lifting weights up above your head, to have somebody that's never done that stuff before do it initially, there's no way they're going to get the benefit from it. If your whole purpose is to teach them what extension feels like, or to develop power through their lower body, keeping their trunk stiff, and all these things, it's so complex. So for a beginner, there might be 1,000 alternatives that are better suited to their capacity. A simple vertical jump could do. A vertical jump is the same thing if your goal is to develop power and triple extension. But now they don't have to deal with a load in their hands. So they're probably it's going to be much easier to control their trunk. It's going to be much easier to control their knees. Their focus is no longer on how much load they're lifting. Their focus becomes on the movement pattern, which was our focus in the beginning. Okay, so really question why you're doing what you're doing. And is there an easier way to teach this or to do this so that I learn and improve my movement patterns and adapt ingrain the behavior that I want. Any other questions? Okay, push-ups. Who's helping me with push-ups? Bill? Luke? Somebody? Okay, so we're going to do 2-arm versus 1-arm push-up. And I'm going to challenge Bill a little bit too. Okay, so first thing when we're doing a push-up, let's find neutral spine. Okay, so Bill's going to show us a nice neutral spine. Is Bill neutral? Can you go back to your knees? Is Bill neutral? Is Bill neutral? No. So this is a great situation. So, well, Luke couldn't give me compensation. Bill does. Thanks, Bill.
I'm the good help.
He's the good help. Okay, so a lot of people think they're neutral, then they're not. So we're going to put Bill a little further. Oh, that's full extension. So we're going to back him off a little bit. We're going to back him off a little bit. Right there. Okay, that's good. That's where we want Bill. Now he's going to move his feet back. Okay, from there, now we're going to do a push-up. So what are we looking at in the push-up? Other than the back, what are we looking for? Range. How low do we go? So our back isn't it. Okay, so what's the form we're keeping? You can relax there for a sec, Bill. So this isn't necessarily, our back isn't limiting our range necessarily. What's limiting our range? Shoulders. Okay, and so what's going to happen with the shoulders when we've gone past our capacity? Okay, shoulders are going to come forwards. Can you show us that, Bill? So that's up. Go down to the bottom. They're not as forwards as they could be, so hop up there, Bill. Okay, so when I'm doing a push-up, if I'm here, can you guys see that, as opposed to there? That's what's going to happen. So it's not the bench press that hurts you. It's how you do the bench press that hurts you. If you're doing a push-up, any type of pushing, if you go down and your shoulders pop forwards, that's going to put load you don't want on the joint. Okay, so the goal is to keep your shoulders back. Limit your range by when that happens. So not everybody should be going down to the ground. It's what control do you have? Okay, so push-up's pretty easy for Bill. How can we make it harder? We could sit on them. So that's adding load. What else could we do? What was the... Yell at them? I could slap them. We could lift a leg. Now, if we're lifting a leg, how does that change things? How does it make it harder? More core meaning what? Okay, rotation. So if my goal, I want to challenge Bill's control of flexion extension. Would I do that by lifting a leg? No. Okay, so think about what are you trying to challenge the individual with or yourself with? If the whole purpose is to improve your ability to deal with load in this plane, add load, add speed, add reps, something like that. Lifting up a leg imposes a completely different challenge. Okay, so when it's bilateral, that's going to be flexion extension. That's going to be different too. Okay, let's have Bill go quick. And relax. So what are we going to tend to see there? What's going to happen? We lose form. So shoulders are going to go, or back's going to go. Okay, so pay attention. Always the same things. Focus on those same key features always. All right, now we are going to go to a single arm push-up. And how does that change things? So now there's a rotational demand. Okay, what might we see? Yeah, that's pretty good. Can you face the wall? Okay, so what do most people do when they try and do a single arm push-up? They rotate. They shift their body weight. They come up this way, and they twist. What's the purpose of the single arm push-up? Is it to rotate, twist, cock your shoulder, impress your friends? Think about what we're trying to do. So, I think the single arm push-up is a fantastic exercise to challenge your rotational control of your trunk. But most people aren't going to be able to do it that way. It's possible. So you can do a single arm push-up if your feet are wide enough and control your trunk all the way down and all the way up. It is possible. Okay? But if you can't do that, so you guys can try it, but if you can't do that, what do? Pardon? Somebody said something. On your knees. Okay, so we can go on the knees. What else can we do? That's a similar pattern, slightly different, because there's no longer the same flexion extension thing. So the comment was we could do a single arm bench. It's similar. It's still a little bit different. The rotational demand is the same, but flexion extension demand is different. Exactly. So we could elevate his arms. So whether it's on a Smith machine or the wall, we can do the single arm push-up, but we reduce the challenge. It's easier to do push-ups when you're upright than it is on the ground, right? We can do the same thing. So if we're trying to teach control, did you do it on your knees? So we can elevate and play with things because I think this is a really great exercise to challenge control. It's not the only exercise you can do, but it is one really, really good one. Ooh. Face the wall, Bill? Let's show them that one. Okay, I want you to tell me what Bill looks like here. Yep. What do we see? Lots of twisting. He's lateral bending. Okay, what do we want to see? Not that. All right? Where should the hand be? So the tendency is, whenever we do a single arm push-up, we're going to move the hand to the middle, and then we're going to do it. What does that do? It forces us into compensation. So we have to create room for our body to move, so we have to lateral bend. If you get into a regular push-up position, just lift one hand. That's where your hand has to be. Okay? And then up and down that way. Very challenging, but can be fantastic for trunk control. Yeah, decrease range of motion, so you don't have to go the same depth as you do in a push-up. Deal with what you have the capacity to do. Any questions? Any comments? That's after. Okay, groups again, try that. Two-arm push-up, try a little faster, and then try the single-arm push-up. I had one comment on lifting that I think was really good that I need to address before we move on, is, you know, as firefighters, we're often placed in situations where we have to lift with bad form. So we're lifting up, you know, somebody off the floor, off the toilet, you know, lifting up a stretcher, and we have to get down really, really low. What do? Well, what I say is limit the exposures that you have to those situations. So we might be faced with that type of stuff on the job, but it doesn't mean we have to use the same patterns in the gym. So we might have a limited number of flexions or twists before our back breaks. Let's limit that. So when we are in an environment where we can use good form, let's do that so that our body starts to learn these good behaviors. So when faced with situations, unless we have to adopt a bad pattern, we adopt a good one. If you remember back to when I was showing the slide about how injuries happen, and the cumulative or the chronic stuff was we apply a load, capacity goes down a little bit, apply another load a little bit further, and so we're degrading the tolerance of these tissues. If we use the controlled environment like a gym to recover, to build up that capacity again, we're delaying the onset of those injuries. Okay, so just because we're forced into situations sometimes that are bad doesn't mean that we have to adopt those patterns everywhere. Okay? Any questions about pushing? Single arm hard? Yeah? Good. All right, let's go on to pulling. So I'm going to have Jason come up and help me out. So again, we're going to do a two-arm and a one-arm. Okay, so let's face that way first. So we're going to do just a bent over row. Okay, so where are when he starts, where are the dumbbells in relation to his shoulders? So let's keep them in line. Okay, gravity works. If we try and hold the dumbbells out here, what's gravity trying to make us do? They're going to pull back. So there's no use in doing this. Let's lean over so our hands are directly under our shoulders. All right, and then from there, Jason's going to pull. What are we looking for? Making sure his back's good. What might we see? Exactly. So as somebody pulls, can you pull and go into extension? He can't do it bad either. So I got some terrible assistance here. There we go. Nice. So as somebody pulls, they might do the same as with lifting. So you might extend to exaggerate the pull. You don't want to do that. Okay, so limit the extension. As you set up, just like in the plank, you might feel that you're neutral, but you're not. So you might be slightly flexed off the start. Make sure your pelvis is rotated and you're nice and neutral. Okay? Just face the back so they can see that too. Again, as he bends over from the top, we're looking for the wrinkles in the shirt. As he goes down, do they change? Okay? And just pull up. That's a good bad rep. Okay. Let's go to one leg. Or sorry, one arm. Just one. So drop one weight. Okay, so when we do one arm, do we stagger the feet? Do we keep the feet side by side? Does it matter? You could do either. Okay. Pardon? Whatever's comfortable for you. Okay? So he's going to sit up in the same way. So we're looking for the same kind of angle. Back's still got to be neutral. We're watching that there's no curve here. There's a little bit of a curve. Okay? And so he's going to row. And what are we looking for? Rotation. So rotating his trunk. So we don't necessarily want to see this. Okay, so we want the motion through the arm, not necessarily the back. What do we think of Jason's arm? Where should the elbow be? Okay, so what I would say is it's going to be easier. So one of the other key features that we haven't really talked about is like with the push-up. We don't want the shoulder popping forwards. We don't want it coming up here. So it's going to be easier to keep that shoulder back and down if the elbow's in here. And as you pull, if you turn your thumb out, it's going to be even easier to keep that shoulder back. As you pull, if your shoulder pops forwards because your elbow's too high, that's going to be bad for your shoulder. Your back might be great, but your shoulders could be bad. So as you pull, okay, so do the one arm again. Just switch your feet. There you go. Just give yourself some room to pull. As he pulls, I want to see his scapula coming back. So we see how his shoulder kind of hung out in front and didn't move? I want this to move with his arm as he pulls. So I want to see his arm move, his shoulder move. I don't want to see the shoulder still and just the arm move. You guys see the difference? Okay. Any questions with the pull? All right, let's try two arm, let's try one arm. For beginners, is when you're bent over, if you kind of break up the motion, so the first part is just on the retraction piece, and then you pull with the arms, that could make it easier to get that motion down. But what I would say is don't become ingrained with that for the long term. Okay, so you don't want to make it piecewise the whole time. Eventually, you want to integrate it into the whole pattern. Okay, but initially, as you're starting, it might be easier to go retraction first, set my shoulders really well, and then pull back. Second thing about trunk angle, don't be afraid to lean over. So just like with the lifting, get over this way. Because again, gravity works. If we can pull perpendicular to our body, it's going to be much, much easier for us. We're not going to come up here with the shoulders. If we only lean over this way, we're going to start pulling up like that. Kind of goes away from the pattern that we're trying to create. Any questions with lifting? Or sorry, lifting. Pulling? Sorry. We're good? Okay. So I know we only got a little bit of time left, but I want to show you guys some alternatives to planks and side bridges and that type of stuff for the core stuff. And give you my thoughts on that. Okay, so how do we progress if we're core training? How do we progress things? Well, we've talked about loads and speeds, and really it goes back to demands. So all these exercises we can do, any core exercise we can do, we can progress it by changing the reps and the sets and the loads and the speeds, the times, the rest that we have. But typically what we see is it's planks, it's side bridges, maybe a little bit of twisting stuff. How long do we hold the plank for? Well, till you lose form, but do we want to hold it for 10 minutes? Well, I've seen some people hold it for 10 minutes. But it's like, okay, that's a great party trick, but what are we trying to do? So when do we stop? When do you guys stop? Or do you just keep going? When the form ends? It don't take long. But does it need to? So what happens if you can hold a front plank for 18 minutes, but you lift like this, and you squat like this? What's a front plank going to do for you? Maybe nothing. So again, when we think about what we're trying to get out of the exercise, so something like that, it can be a great way to teach what neutral feels like. So we're building capacity to control flexion and extension. But eventually, if we look at the demands of our life, again, back to demands and capacity, if we look at the situations that we put ourselves in, the movement patterns that we have to perform on a day-to-day basis, what are those demands? So what happens if, firefighters, how often are we holding that type of position for 18 minutes? Typically, it's very dynamic tasks, so we have to maintain trunk control in lots of different stuff. So what do? Well, in training, if the whole goal is to prepare ourselves to do that, we have to challenge our system accordingly. We have to try and perturb our system with loads and speeds and reps, so frequency, to improve our capacity to match the demands of our life. Because maybe it'd be more appropriate instead of holding that for 18 minutes, maybe we pack on load. Or maybe we don't even do that. Maybe we do something that's a little bit better that still challenges trunk control, but in a very different situation. Can I have you come up for a sec? What'd you say? Nothing? Okay. So Luke's going to do a couple alternatives here for us that start very similar to this, but just slight changes. So we're going to make it dynamic now, so it's not just holding that one position. So we're going to do from that, just go down to a plank on your elbows. From here, Luke's going to extend his elbow. What does that do? Does it change things? Does it make it harder? Yeah. Okay, so if we're holding something way out here, that's going to be more challenging. But still very similar to a plank. Okay, now if you go up to your hands. What happens if my goal is to challenge control of flexion extension. So go onto your toes. Okay, so I'm going to have Luke flex his hip. What's typically going to happen? He's going to flex. So my goal, it's not load here. I want Luke to become really, really aware of what neutral feels like. Because my goal with this task is to have Luke, I'm trying to perturb Luke a little bit here to say, all right, you got that front plank dialed in. But what happens when you start moving your hips? So whether it's a squat, it's a lunge, it's a lift. This could be a rudimentary thing to see how well can he maintain control. So Luke's going to flex his hip. And with most people, they're going to tuck under because they don't necessarily know what it feels like to maintain that control. So we use a plank to teach control, but it's got to progress from there. That's my point. Okay, does that kind of make sense? All right. What about what about a side bridge? How do we progress a side bridge? If the goal is to challenge lateral bend control. So I want somebody to be really, really resilient to any of that. How do I challenge that aside from a side plank? Pardon? So if we lift a leg, so that's going to add load to it. So it's going to make it a little harder. What else could I do? How do I make it more dynamic? We could bring a knee up. Somebody shout something out. Okay, so we could drop the hips back to the floor and back up. But what does that do? If our goal is to make you really, really resistant to lateral bend, and we're just doing this stuff, that might create a bad habit. Okay, so we could attach a band and resist band. That's going to add a rotational thing. So fantastic exercise to challenge trunk control, but it's more rotation. So I'll show you that in a sec. Could push down on his hips. We could add weight. What about an overhead press? Is that any different than a side plank? No. If you're doing a farmer's walk on one side, is it any different than a side plank? No. If I'm doing a split jerk on one side, this way, is it any different than a side plank? Way more demanding, same lateral bend control challenge. Okay, think about if my goal is to challenge lateral bend control, I need to perturb the body in lots of different ways. I got to add variation. Because we're not doing side planks on the job. We're not doing side planks at home. It's, I need to put you in lots of different environments so you show me control. And so we can do an overhead press. Now this is load, completely loaded from a different plane. But the compensation is going to be this. So as I push, or the second I put load on my shoulder here, I'm leaning in this way. Have you guys seen that? Now you're kind of thinking about it? Okay, if you start going faster, it's going to be really, really challenging. If you're doing, say you're doing a shoulder raise on one side, tendency is going to be to bend. It's the same control challenge as a side plank. But we don't want to be doing side planks forever. Because in this situation, we're really saying that time is the most important thing. So we want to extend the duration that you can hold these things. But what if in your life, it's loads and speeds that dictate your control? So if you're performing a firefighting task, whether it be a chop, some type of lift, it's more loads, it's speeds that you have to have the control to deal with. So doing this stuff is great at the beginning, but progress from there. Ask yourself, how can I challenge myself in the same way? Okay, with loads and speeds and reps and sets and all that stuff. Does that make sense? All right. Do you have a bar there, Luke? Okay, so what about rotation? How do we rotate? How do we challenge rotation? So yeah, we could do chops and lifts and all that stuff, but make sure you're getting rotation through your hips. Okay, so when we're doing any type of this stuff, make your power come through your hip. Lock your trunk onto your pelvis. So rotation training is more about resisting rotation. The lifting the arm thing was a good first step, but we want to elevate it from there. Okay, so one of the things you can do, so if Luke is going to do, he can do a push or a pull with me. Just get down into like a nice athletic stance here. So if I add some resistance, and Luke goes, just do a pull. Just pull in. Pull in. Okay, so I'm adding a little resistance to Luke here. Does this impose a rotational demand? Yes, because it's on one side. Anytime there's a load applied on one side of the body, it's going to impose a rotational demand. Just like when I put a load on one side here. Okay, it's going to make me do this. If I do it in this plane, I'm trying to resist rotation. So if I'm pretending I'm a cable or a band or something like that, or I'm another person, and I'm resisting Luke here, he's having to resist the urge to rotate. Does that make sense? We can do the same thing from the other way. Push up. So if Luke is pushing, so pushing against me. Okay, so now there's a demand going the other way. Okay, so we can push or pull, creating a rotational demand, and he's got to resist that. Comment before about a rotational bench press, or like a one-arm bench press. Same type of thing. So we're imposing a rotational demand. But if we think about a rotational press on a bench, or a single-arm press on a bench, very different than a single-arm push-up, because the flexion extension demand is different. Because we're not having to deal with gravity anymore. So the rotational piece is the same, but this way is different. Does that make sense? Okay. You guys can try. So I've got all those things listed. Oh, one other one. So back to lateral bend. You can stagger your hands in a push-up, and it'll do the same thing. So if you try and do a push-up this way, tendency is going to be to do that. You have to resist lateral bend. Okay, so you're welcome to try any of these things. We'll walk around, help you guys out. Officially, there's about 10 minutes left, but I don't mind if you guys stay a little longer to try this stuff out, and we can provide some feedback. Okay, so all these things, I want you thinking about it. These are ways to progress core training. It's ways to challenge the trunk. So in addition to reps and sets and loads and speeds, you can use any of these variations to do the same thing. Just before we break, so I'll put this back up in a sec. You guys can send me an email if you want to get the presentation. I'll send you a PDF copy of this, so you don't need to take pictures and all that stuff. But the whole purpose, again, of this whole thing, making exercise matter, because I know that some of you guys, when you retire, you want to be doing that. All right? So, all right, so you guys can break up again, try some of these things. We'll provide some feedback. If you don't want to, then I thank you for coming. Hope you learned a little bit. Yep. So my email is there. I'm going to put the other sheet back up, so if you do want it, you can come and ask me. It's d.frost@utoronto.ca.